William Hess, thanks very much indeed for joining us. First up, is the softly approach the way to go?
So far, that's been the one most often tried, but it also seems to be the method that has gotten the least results. So I think given the political cycle in the U.S. and given the state of the world economy, this is a time when politicians in the West are willing to be a bit more vocal and hoping that'll have a greater effect on the authorities here in Beijing to move on the currency.
Is this war of words likely to intensify from the U.S. side, at least, as we head to those midterm elections?
Well, based on the clips that you played in the lead-in, I think it doesn't have far to go to reach quite a high level. But still, I think there is some room for that to continue, especially given the results of the recent primaries in the U.S. and the sensitivity of the electorate to this issue. But the campaign cycle aside, there are some really big pressures on the White House to deal with some broader structural issues in the U.S. economy, and the RMB is really one of them.
Right. Tell us about the Chinese position here. Did they look back at Japan in the mid-1980s and the Plaza Accord? Talk to us about the Plaza Accord and tell people what it was, and how does China see itself with regard to it?
Sure. I think if we go back to the agreement signed between a variety of parties in 1985 at the Plaza Hotel in New York, which led to the large depreciation of the U.S. dollar relative to the yen, relative to other currencies, that helped to spur the U.S. economy along. The Chinese have always looked at that as a model of what not to do. So they don't want to be forced into a position where their economy is hurt by a policy that they would see to benefit the U.S. In a disproportionate way. So they're likely to maintain a very hard position. They don't want to be forced into a corner where they have to negotiate some kind of settlement. So far they've been trying to avoid that, trying to move very slowly, making some gestures, but clearly it doesn't seem to be enough either for the U.S. or for a growing chorus of countries around the world who see this as an unfair advantage.
Well, what happens next? I mean, how do you think this is all going to play out?
Well, I think clearly the underlying logic for the Sino-U.S. economic relationship and for China's trade relationships elsewhere, it doesn't work anymore. And so they're going to have to come to some sort of a consensus about what the rules of the game are going to be and what the underlying foundation of the relationship is going to be. Certainly the trade and investment will continue, but especially on the political front, when you also put this into the context of rising tensions in the South Pacific, in a kind of a re-emerging world order, China doesn't want to seem as though it's been left behind or that it's losing out from the way that the world might rebalance. So I think there is some way to go with ratcheting up the rhetoric, and it may take some sort of event or incident to really prompt a bunch of parties to sit down and reach some kind of consensus about how things are going to move ahead.
The country keeps on vacillating from, on the one hand, saying we're a strong economy, then on the other hand, oh, we're a weak developing nation as well. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I refer to this as the face-changing diplomacy. Sometimes you get strong China, sometimes you get weak China, just like the Sichuan performance art. So that is becoming increasingly untenable, especially when the economic issues are really at the forefront. It's difficult for China to represent itself as a leader of developing nations when at the same time it is also representing this big financial fortress and taking a strong line on global financial issues. So that's going to be very difficult for them, especially looking ahead to the upcoming negotiations in Cancun on climate change and a host of other forums. But more generally, I think there's really a bigger question about how much China tries to work through the multilateral system and change it from the inside out, or if China can really think that it can maintain its own position and really go it alone for a while and try to redefine its place in the world order according to its own terms. And that's going to be a continuing source of tension between China and the U.S. and China and a whole range of bilateral partners.
William, very quickly, how does that play in, this ambivalent sort of view that they give to the world, play into the WTO cases the country faces?
Well, China doesn't have a very good record at the WTO, and the U.S. usually only brings cases when it feels it's going to win. So it's another area where China may, privately, they may acknowledge that, yeah, these are the rules of the game, we signed up to that treaty. But at the same time, the domestic economic interests come first, and especially in this environment, there's a lot of problems to solve within China, and they don't want to be forced from the outside to do things that may have negative domestic consequences. So for the time being, China is going to put China's interests first, just like the U.S. or other partners would. But at the same time, that's going to be a source of friction when parties sit down and when these issues come before Congress or come before other bodies around the world.
William Hess, thanks a lot for joining us. Will Hess there joining us from Beijing. He's from China Analytics.